Hello, hello. We are back with another Chalk Talk, and this week we have Sara Canney. Sara is an author, athlete, and entrepreneur. She is founder of Rise.Run.Retreat, an inclusive running retreat for women based in New England. Through the retreat's in-person and online experiences, Sara helps women gain confidence, find strength, and make authentic connections through running. And these themes underpin our nonprofit work as well. So I was just so excited to get a chance to talk to Sara. She's also a competitive mountain and snowshoe runner, recently finishing with a bronze medal at the 2020 World Snowshoe Championships. You'll learn more about that, as well as some practical advice for endurance athletes, how to strengthen the mind for all of us during these challenging times, and how to get back to your roots and chase the joy. Enjoy our chat. All right. Welcome, Sara. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Lani. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to be here.
Yay. So I read on your website right away, the first three words that I see are confidence, strength, and connection. And those are so important to Strong Girls United and us. Can you just tell us a little bit about what they mean to you or where they were born from for you?
Yeah, so I really feel like those are the key concepts that I've learned in my running journey. I was not a runner in high school or college. I played basketball and that was my thing, and I was really into that, but opted not to play in college and kind of chose my school based on academics versus sports. And so in college, I found myself wanting some athletic competitive outlet. And I made the choice that I was going to run a marathon. That was like my first running goal, was to run a marathon. And I thought it would be like a bucket list thing where I would just go out and run and check it off my bucket list. But really through my journey of finding running, I feel like I've really gained a stronger sense of self. I've gained a lot of confidence as a adolescent and a teen. And then in my early adulthood, I was very shy, very much kind of hung in the background, didn't really speak up. And so I really feel like through the physical activity of running, I've learned to trust myself, and have gained so much strength, and really realized that that strength was inside me all along. It just wasn't coming to the surface. So I think that's where the confidence and the strength comes from. And then, I've also realized through running that I've made some of the strongest connections and friendships in my life currently. And it's really being connected with other women who run has enriched my life so much. And I think that those connections are really important. So that's kind of where those three words come from.
I love that. And we talk a lot about how these skills that we're trying to teach girls are, we talk just what you said, they're inside, and it's just how do we get them out? So I love that. And you've done 3 World Snowshoe Running Championships, which, to be honest, that was the first I've heard of snowshoe running. And when I think about it, I think of it, and I'm not an endurance athlete, but I think of how hard that must be. And I know one of your sort of mantras or mottos is something about the hill, embrace the
Embrace
hill,
the hill.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think about, wow, that must be so hard. Can you just talk a little bit about snowshoe running and also your experiences in these world championships? That must be so cool.
Yeah. So snowshoe running is definitely a niche sport. There are not a lot of people who partake in snowshoe running. I mean, I think when people ask about it, I say, well, it happens in the winter on the snow. So that like immediately rules out about 50% of runners. So it's a small community that enjoys the sport, but I fell in love with it. In 2014 was the first time that I ever raced or ran on snowshoes. And I ran on rented snowshoes. There was something inside me that said, show up to this race, rent the snowshoes and see what happens. And I just loved everything about it. It made me just feel really alive and free, and a little bit like I was maybe like running through a Robert Frost poem, because there's like snow and you're in the woods, and it's very picturesque. And as I got more involved in the sport, I was sort of rising through the ranks a little bit in some of the local races, and finishing, pretty well. I went to my first snowshoe championships. I think it was the winter of 2016, 2017. And those were in Saranac Lake, excuse me, New York. So I was able to drive. And I think I finished 18th, somewhere in there. And there was something inside me that was like, I just think I can do better than 18th. I think I think I have it in me to be really good at this sport. And so over the years, every winter comes around, and I've just dedicated more of myself to that, and to improving as a runner. And in 2018, I went to the National Snowshoe Championships, which were in Vermont. And I finished third, which was just a breakthrough race for me. And I made the snowshoe national team. So I had the opportunity to represent the US at the World Snowshoe Championships in Italy in 2019. And that was really kind of a dream come true. I think growing up an athlete, you kind of always maybe have this little dream. I mean, any kid who's ever watched the Olympics probably thinks like, man, that's what I want to do. And so to be able to travel abroad for sport was really exciting to me. It was like a little bit of that childhood dream coming true. And here I am in my mid 30s. And, that dream that I kind of had as a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid is coming to be in its own little way, not exactly, it's not the Olympics, but it still is a world stage, and it still is, a competition. So it's something that I train hard for. And so in Italy, it was an amazing trip. This was the beginning of 2019. An amazing trip. And I finished ninth overall. So I finished in the top 10, which was a big improvement from 18th several years before. That was just a fantastic trip. And then I ended up on the team again, and was able to go to the World Snowshoe Championships this year, which were in Miyako, Japan, in the middle of February. So it was kind of right at the cusp of before everything kind of started happening around the world currently with the pandemic that we're in. So I was able to travel there and race, and I finished third. So I finished on the podium at a World Championships and received a bronze medal, which was really exciting. So for me, I think just the ability to travel and see places in the world and have the connection of sport with people who, like, maybe you don't speak the same language, but you're all participating in this same activity. That's been really fun. And also I've gotten to see some just incredibly beautiful places. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy traveling, and it's kind of fun to travel to these places in the winter. So sometimes, typically if you're planning an overseas trip, you plan it for the best weather, which is sometimes in the spring or the summer. So, for these trips, we're traveling in the coldest, snowiest months of the year. So seeing places in the winter is kind of cool.
Definitely takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. One of the things that I'm thinking about is how much I love sport in general, like how, and the opportunities that the door doesn't have to close at the end of a college career, or, and finding, it seems like you have found a sport and you have found ways to, be competitive and push yourself and all these things. How have your kids, I mean, was that just so cool for them to have mom do this? Like that seems so awesome to me.
Yeah, well, I think, it is neat that, just because you get older doesn't mean that your sport career or your athletic career is over. I think for a really long time, I thought of myself as a mom who runs. And very much, so I have 3 children, and very much when I was pushing a stroller with them and when they were very little, I just felt like I was a mom first, but like a runner second. And as they got a little older, I realized, actually, I don't have to just be a mom who runs. I can actually think of myself as an athlete. And actually, when I started to have that shift in mentality of thinking of myself as an athlete, that's actually when I started to have some really breakthrough performances. Obviously, there was a lot of hard work too that was sort of underlying that I had built on. But I think that shift in mentality allowed that hard work to really sort of blossom and flourish into some really key performances. So I think you get to choose your identity at any age. And it doesn't, your athletic identity doesn't have to end just because you've had kids or just because you're getting older, which is really neat. And it has been, I think my kids really do enjoy what mom does. Like, I've been in the paper, and my mother-in-law always clips out, the actual paper, because we don't get a paper, and she brings the articles to us, and the kids think that's really cool. And then they enjoy coming on the run with me when they can. My daughter just this week has been back into running at the, now that it's a little warmer, back into running with me, either at the beginning or the ends of my runs. So that's really fun. But yeah, they were really sweet. I mean, it takes a village for these kinds of overseas trips to happen. So my parents are usually stay with the kids while we travel. My husband and I travel. And when we came back from Japan, they had plastered all kinds of posters all over the house, and they were really excited. So
Great to be able to have them part of that experience too.
Yeah, very
So
much.
my girls, because of my work running this nonprofit, I find them doing they mimic, right? So it's important for us to know, as we probably all know, but important for us to be sort of on the forefront of how important what we're doing. Like, they're watching us, even when I don't necessarily know that they're watching us, I'll hear them sort of like mock interviewing or mock doing something, that I'm like, okay, they've been watching.
Yeah, that's
um
fantastic.
so as an endurance athlete, I imagine that self-talk that's one of our themes that we talk about in Strong Girls, is self-talk. And we did a little bit of this last week around confidence chalk talk that we did, as it kind of came up as part of that. But I'm curious too, just with your own experience, that in these long races, when you are with your body and you're with your mind, and so how does that play out for you? And do you have any tips or suggestions for, it sounds like maybe you come up with some mantras or something. Like, what are some suggestions that you have for people, whether they're young girls heading into their first 5K, or whether it's a collegiate athlete? What are some tools that you use there?
Yeah. So I think endurance sports have a way of sort of really amplifying whatever sort of internal dialogue is going on to begin with. So whatever kind of narrative you've got sort of in your day to day, whether it's positive or negative, when you're out for an endurance event, that gets amplified, partly because you're pushing your body to the absolute limit. So, you could be a little dehydrated, you could be a little underfueled. There's all these things that are going on physically that really kind of amplify what's going on mentally. And what I've found is that, as I've progressed as a runner and gotten better and more competitive, I've noticed that my inner critic and my negative self-talk tends to get loud sometimes. And so one of the things that I do before every race is I write down kind of a list of my fears and self-doubt. So this might be a week before one of my races, and putting all of that fear on the page and actually seeing it and sort of bringing it into the light can be really helpful, because then in the column next to it, I write down all the truth that I know about myself, about how hard I have worked, how many hours I've put in, maybe some really great workouts I've had, things that are true, so that when I'm in the race and that inner dialogue gets amplified, I actually have some tools in my back pocket to kind of pull out and say, like, no, actually I am stronger than I think I am. And Sara, do you remember that workout you did? Like, you crushed that workout and you can crush this race. And so instead of that negative narrative kind of taking over and dominating, I actually have some positive things in my toolbox to combat that. And that's sometimes where the mantras come from. Sometimes I'll think of a mantra before a race, but usually my mantras come mid-race. Like, they come kind of naturally and organically in whatever I'm doing. But I have noticed that there's one mantra that kind of sticks with me that really allows me to shift mental gears. And that mantra is begin again. And I love that because if I do get on this negative thought train and start kind of going down this rabbit hole of negative thoughts, one of the things I can say to myself is begin again. And that's almost like a blank slate, like wiping, doesn't matter what I was just thinking, we're going to clear the slate and we're going to start again and think something positive. And so there's some races where I have to say that to myself over and over in the span of just a few minutes because I'm feeling really discouraged, or maybe I just got passed and I feel like I can't catch the girl who is in front of me. So that phrase begin again is helpful too. It's one that I come back to pretty frequently.
I like that. And you also you are acknowledging the fear or doubts too. That first activity that you gave, I think, is so important, because sometimes we think, like, thinking positively, like we just have to, we have to expect ourselves to think positively all the time. And it's actually, it's work. It takes work to be able to have that voice, being your best inner coach versus your inner critic, and, weighing those two voices and knowing when you need to turn towards the inner coach versus the inner critic. But I think acknowledging those fears or doubts is really important. And it came up in one of our conversations about bravery and courage too. It takes courage, it takes bravery to be able to acknowledge the fears and then be able to keep moving forward and talk about it. It's not about being fearless. You don't have to go into a race being fearless. It's actually opposite of that. Those butterflies or what you might be feeling are totally normal, and your bravery or courage means you still keep moving forward just in spite of those.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah.
Another phrase that I had read, and maybe I think you said it was maybe with the most recent World Championships, was chase the joy. And so that's something else that I was really thinking about, and really excited to talk to you more about what that means to you, because joy is such a foundational part of what experience we want to give girls as part of our team. And in sport, when I think about if I could have changed one thing from in terms of a perspective shift, a mental shift like you've talked about, in my collegiate career, it would be finding the joy and hanging on to that a little bit more than I did. And so can you talk about where that, you said maybe it was even mid-race, like where did that kind of evolve from, and what does that mean? How do we help athletes do that?
Yeah. Well, I think, you kind of touched on it, where when we enter sport, like whatever we have an affinity for, whatever we're drawn to, whether it's swimming or basketball or softball or snowshoe running or cross country running, whatever it is that we're sort of drawn to, we're drawn to it because it brings us joy, right? We're drawn to it because we feel free. We feel the most like ourselves in those scenarios. And I think sometimes we initially start with joy, and then pressure from teammates or coaches or parents comes in, internal pressure, expectation that we put on ourselves starts to bubble up. And sometimes that can really steal the joy out of a movement or an activity or sport that you really love. And so for me, this idea of chasing the joy, for me, that says get back to your roots, like get back to that first love, that thing that you loved about snowshoe running when you first started, like get back to that, somehow tap into that. Because I know that if I can tap into that joy, that I'm going to perform far better than if I'm thinking about an outcome, a desired outcome that I have, or expectations or pressure, external pressure and expectations, kind of imposed on me. Or even that I've perceived are being imposed on me. Maybe they're not even real. Maybe they're just my perception. So that's really where that came from. It was the race that you were referring to was the National Championships in Leadville, Colorado, which was back in February. I had flown out there. For those of you who don't know, Leadville is at 10,000 feet. So the air is thin up there. And if you don't live and train at altitude, running at 10,000 feet is incredibly difficult. And even if you do live and train at altitude, unless you're like up that high, it still is difficult. I know people were coming up from, Boulder, Colorado, which is right around, 5,000 feet. And that difference of an additional 5,000 feet still has a big impact. And so I knew going in, I live here in New England, and I live on a little hill that's at like 614 feet. So not that high above sea level, certainly not 10,000 feet. But I knew going out there that I was at a disadvantage because I live at sea level and I don't train at elevation. And a lot of the women who I would be competing against do live and train at elevation. There were a lot of women coming in from New Mexico, Albuquerque, which is at like 3,000 or 4,000 feet. A lot of women coming from Colorado. And so I knew my competition was at a slight advantage. And, I knew I had trained my hardest. I was in the best shape possible. But I was also it was 2 weeks prior, I had finished third at the World Championships. So I'd just gotten that bronze medal. So there was all this kind of swirl of pressure and expectation, thinking like, I just finished third at a World Championships. People are going to expect me to be like the one to beat here. There's a lot of pressure, in that regard. Plus, I know that the women who are showing up are just a high caliber athlete. They're incredibly competitive, and they all live and train at altitude. So there's just this sort of swirl of pressure that was causing me a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of performance anxiety, because I just wasn't sure if I would measure up, right? Am I going to measure up to this external expectation of you did so well at Worlds, are you going to do as well at Nationals, and also competing against, some really talented women. And so I had the chance to, the day before the race, I had the chance to walk the course to kind of familiarize myself with the course. And I went out on my snowshoes, and it was this, crystal clear, perfectly blue sky day in Leadville. And the Rocky Mountains Continental Divide is like right there. And there were spots on the course that had these breathtaking views. And I thought, I love this sport. I love running in the winter. I love where it takes me. These views are incredible. I just need to find the bliss in this run tomorrow, and I just need to chase the joy. So that's kind of where that came from. And then that led me to just kind of come to a place where, where I decided I was going to let go of the things that I couldn't control. So I can't control who shows up on race day. I can't control how they do or where they live and how they train. And so I just started to focus in on my attitude because I knew that's what I could control. And so then I started to shift my focus to, how can I find joy in this race? How can I chase the joy as I'm sort of moving through the race? So that's where that came from.
Great. I love that. And I love the connection between using that and that mantra with how it helped you with the controlling the controllables. And we have an activity of like, in the book that I have for the young girls, it's just like a person kind of outlined, and there's prompts, and you have to put them either inside the person or outside the person, you know, like trying to just start to learn, you know, what can I control, like the weather, can I control, you know, who my sibling is versus, you know, the effort, or like what you said, your attitude being really, really important for all ages. So that's really, I love hearing, and I appreciate you sharing sort of your whole sort of journey and thought process, because I think it's something that I'm already thinking of some of the high school athletes that I work with that will relate so much to how you described that, and your practice. It takes practice for you to be able to make those shifts and find that mantra that works, or make that shift. You know, is this something where has that practice come from? You know, is it just over time as an athlete, or do you spend time on, you know, this?
Yeah. So I've always been a journaler. I've always been somebody who keeps a journal. I have a whole Rubbermaid bin of journals that go back to 1998. So when I was in high school, I tend not to crack those ones open. It's a little embarrassing, but I've always written down, you know, I've always just kept a journal. And so, as I've become more competitive, with my running, I've realized that journaling piece is really important for me before a race. And so I spend, you know, I'm journal pretty much daily, but, when I'm not going into a competition, a lot of times the topics in my journal are not necessarily my running, but I find that as I come to an important race, I sort of shift into thinking about the mentality that I'm going to have on race day, thinking about what I'm afraid of, you know, and I think it's really important to face the fear that you have so that it doesn't surprise you on race day. I think one of my sort of methods of dealing with fear in the past was to kind of pretend it wasn't there and just say, well, just think positive. But that doesn't really work if you haven't addressed the fear that's there. So I spend a lot of time journaling, and you know, sometimes it's paragraphs, sometimes it's lists, sometimes it's bullet points. You know, it takes all different forms. But that's a key way for me to process what's going on in my head.
That's awesome. I love that. So you also run your own retreat for women. It's Rise.Run.Retreat, right?
Mm-hmm.
For
Yep.
women runners. Are there any sort of exercises, mental exercises, not running exercises, that you do with the women at your retreat that you see as equally valuable for your daughter, for example, or for young girls? Like, you know, you talked about tapping into vulnerability and journaling and you know, writing things down and being able to write down your fears, and then also what you know is true. Like, what are there any others that we haven't talked about that come to mind?
Yeah. So actually, you know, with each retreat that I put on, everyone gets a booklet, basically that kind of goes along with the activities that we do over the course of the weekend. And some of the things that I have people think about is this idea of belonging. You know, where is it that you believe you belong? And I think that's a really important question to ask, because I think sometimes that there are things that are in our heart that are kind of deep down dreams maybe that we have, or goals for ourselves that we are maybe a little afraid of because we don't feel like we belong there, because maybe we don't have a track record to justify that dream or that goal. And so I really encourage the women who come to the retreat to kind of tap into what's that place that you secretly believe you belong. I know that in 2016, I wrote in my training journal that I wanted to finish third at the 2018 National Snowshoe Championships. And at the time in 2016, I had no track record that would back up such a goal. My times didn't match up. My running resume was not impressive, but there was something inside me that believed that if I worked hard enough, I know I'm a hard worker, I know I'm diligent. If I worked hard enough, that actually I could improve to the point where that dream could be possible. And it took 2 years to do that, but I was able to accomplish that goal. And so I think having the faith and belief in yourself to allow those things that are in your heart to really grow and flourish is incredibly important. And I really think that that's something that anyone of any age can do. And the neat thing too is thinking about the fact that, and I mentioned this before, that little sort of dream that I had, because I watched the Olympics and I used to watch Jenny Thompson, swimming and getting decorated with gold medals. And that inspired me so much that I, kind of wanted to be in the Olympics too. Like, what kid who hasn't watched the Olympics hasn't had that goal? That those dreams and those goals that you have in your younger age, like if you keep at them, some version of them might come true 15, 20 years down the road. Like, you have no idea. So I think it's really important to hang on to those things, because if they're in your heart, then they're meant to be there and they're meant to be for you. So
that's great. And it sounds like too, that act of even just writing it down as a means of it being a place that you belong, like that you're connecting that the goal and the belonging piece together as well. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any other activities? We talked a little bit earlier, and it sounds like now, if I'm remembering correctly, it might even be very related to athlete, but just sort of in terms of right now, like right now, as families are home and girls are home, or if a parent is watching this or listening to this, and they're wanting to just do a little activity for their little ones together about chasing the joy or naming their fears, what is it that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I think right now, especially, just because there is kind of this low level of stress and anxiety that everyone is feeling, whether it's parents and kids, everyone's kind of under some stress right now. I think to really kind of find the joy in this time, I would encourage parents and anyone else watching to grab a notebook, grab a piece of paper, and make 2 columns for yourself. And on one side, I want you to think about, what are the things that you're feeling really disappointed about? This actually kind of is similar to that fear thing. Acknowledge those disappointments, acknowledge those things you're bummed out about, missing an entire sports season, not being able to go to those games, not being able to practice with your team, whatever it is that you're feeling bummed about, what you're feeling maybe discouraged about or disappointed in, make a list of all those things. And then on the other side of the page, make a list of all the things that are bringing you joy right now. I know that there have been some things for me that are kind of popping up that are very unexpected sources of joy and fun, whether they're little things, themed dinners I've been doing with my family, or because all my races have been canceled, I've been creating these personal challenges for myself. And in some ways, they've actually been more fun than a race because there's not so much of the performance pressure. So make a list of all the things that are going on right now in your life that are bringing you joy. And then spend some time thinking about how can you cultivate more joyful experiences? How can you sort of make more room in your day-to-day life for those things that are bringing you joy? And I think it's important too, to, that side of the page that has all your disappointments, really acknowledge that that's okay. That's okay that you're bummed out about those things. And you don't have to ignore that feeling of being bummed out and disappointed, but you can make a choice to move more into the joy rather than dwelling in the disappointment.
That's great. And it sounds like you just gave us sort of your, like you had gave us your roadmap a little bit pre-race, like, your pre-World Championship, you've got your 2 columns, and now we have a very concrete way of having doing this for just the day to day. So I appreciate it so much. It's been so great chatting with you. All of the things that you have gone through as an athlete and person, parent, mother, all of the above, just can really relate to a lot of it. And I think, again, our athletes and will be able to relate to and get a lot of great tips out of just our short conversation there. So if parents or moms or women that are listening want to know more about finding you and working with you even further, where should they go?
Yeah, so probably the best place to go would be my website, which is sarahcanney.com. That's SarahCanney.com. And then also you can find me on social media. I'm really active on Instagram. And over there, my handle is at sarah.canney. And that's where I like to hang out is over on Instagram.
Yay. Awesome. I love it. I will make sure to include all of that and lots of the tips and tricks and tools and journal entries that Sara has mentioned into a little ebook that can be found on our website as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lani. I really appreciate you inviting me, and it's been fun to be here.
Awesome.